What if the quiet single dad you judged by his worn suit turned out to be the one man holding everyone's future in his hands? Stay with this story until the very last line, because the final twist will change how you see power, love, and loyalty forever. If you believe great stories should surprise you, move you, and make you think, subscribe now and never miss a story that begins ordinary and ends unforgettable. She met him on a Tuesday that had already gone wrong, the kind of day that seems to conspire against even the most powerful people in the world, and for someone like Eleanor Whitmore, billionaire investor, tech empire architect, and a woman used to rooms falling silent when she entered, wrong days were rare, yet this one arrived fully formed, beginning with a board revolt she dismantled before noon, a delayed flight she cancelled with a single call, and ending in a coffee shop she never usually entered because she had 10 assistants who would never let her need caffeine in public. Except that this time she needed quiet more than control, and quiet was exactly what she did not get when she heard a child laughing behind her, a clear unbroken sound that cut through the murmur of the room, and when she turned, irritated at first, she saw a man crouched beside a small boy, patiently fixing a broken shoelace with fingers that moved carefully, as though every motion mattered, the man murmuring something that made the boy laugh again, and Eleanor, against her will, watched longer than she meant to, noticing the faint exhaustion in the man's posture, the way his jacket had been mended at the elbow, the way he listened when the child spoke as though nothing else in the world mattered, and when the man finally looked up and met her gaze, he smiled politely, not the practiced smile of someone who recognized her, not the eager look of someone hoping for advantage, just a simple courteous acknowledgement, and something in that unsettled her more than all the corporate battles she'd won that morning. His name, she would learn, was Daniel Reed, a single father raising his 8-year-old son Noah alone after his wife's death, a man who worked quietly in logistics consulting, advising companies that were too small to matter to someone like Eleanor, except that she didn't know that yet, and what she also didn't know was that this chance meeting would rearrange the architecture of her life in ways no hostile takeover ever could. Their conversation began accidentally, over a spilled coffee that Eleanor's reflexes saved from disaster, and when she apologized, something she rarely did, Daniel laughed softly and said it was fine, genuinely fine, and they spoke for 5 minutes that stretched into 30, about nothing important and everything essential, about raising children, about responsibility, about how success felt emptier when it had no one to come home to, and Eleanor, who had dated politicians and billionaires and men who saw her as a prize, felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest, ease. When Noah tugged at his father's sleeve and asked if they were late, Daniel checked his watch and stood, apologizing again, and Eleanor surprised herself by asking if she could see them again, framing it as practical, as casual, anything but the truth, and Daniel agreed with a nod that felt like trust rather than calculation. Weeks passed, then months, and Eleanor found herself structuring her schedule around dinners that involved crayons on napkins and conversations about school projects, around a man who never asked her what she could do for him, and that was exactly why she began doing things for him anyway, quietly, invisibly, because that was how she operated best. She learned about his work, how he consulted for regional companies, helping them optimize supply chains, restructure failing operations, save jobs rather than cut them, and she recognized brilliance immediately, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that works, and when she offered to introduce him to bigger clients, he hesitated, pride and caution warring in his eyes, but eventually agreed, not for himself, he said, but for Noah's future, and Eleanor respected that more than she could say. Then came the invitation that would change everything. Her younger sister Clara's wedding, a society event blending old money tradition with modern excess, to be held at a coastal estate in Cornwall that overlooked the sea like a painting come to life. Eleanor had delayed introducing Daniel to her family, not out of shame but protection, because her world devoured people whole, and yet she found herself wanting him there, wanting to walk into that glittering, judgmental room with someone real beside her. And when she invited him, she framed it lightly, as a favor, as company, but Daniel heard the weight beneath it and agreed, though he warned her that he owned exactly one suit suitable for weddings and it had seen better days, and Eleanor smiled and told him it was perfect, because it was. The wedding weekend arrived with all the excess expected of a Whitmore event. Private cars, whispered valuations disguised as compliments, guests who measured worth by net value and influence, and Eleanor felt the familiar tightening in her chest as she stepped into that world again. Daniel beside her, Noah staying with a friend, and she felt eyes on them immediately, curiosity turning to judgment as people clocked Daniel's modest attire, his quiet demeanor, the absence of any recognizable pedigree, and Eleanor braced herself for the inevitable questions, the subtle digs, the polite smiles sharpened by disdain. Clara greeted them warmly, genuinely, because Clara had always been kinder than the rest of their circle, and she hugged Daniel without hesitation, thanking him for coming, but others were less gracious, and Eleanor watched as conversations subtly excluded him, as laughter quieted when he joined, and she felt a spark of anger she rarely allowed herself, because this man had earned his place in any room, even if they didn't know it yet. What Eleanor didn't know, what no one at that wedding knew except one man, was that Daniel Reed was not just a consultant to small firms, but the silent architect behind several of the largest logistics restructurings in Europe, a strategist whose methods were studied quietly by CEOs who never attached his name publicly because Daniel preferred it that way, a man who had turned down fame for flexibility, money for time, choosing to remain in the shadows so he could be present for his son, and one of the companies he had quietly rebuilt from the ground up was the multinational firm employing the Groom. The wedding day dawned bright and mercilessly beautiful, the kind of weather that makes people believe in perfect endings, and Eleanor stood on the terrace watching the sea, wondering why she felt more nervous than she had during any merger negotiation, Daniel standing beside her, hands folded loosely, taking in the view with a calm appreciation that grounded her. And when guests began to gather, the unspoken hierarchies reasserted themselves quickly, old acquaintances greeting Eleanor with questions thinly disguised as assessments, eyes flicking to Daniel with curiosity sharpened by confusion, because he didn't fit, and that unsettled them. At the reception, conversations drifted toward business, as they always did, and Eleanor noticed a group of executives discussing supply chain failures, complaining about disruptions, blaming everything but themselves, and she watched Daniel listen quietly, his head tilted slightly, not interrupting, not correcting, until one man scoffed that no consultant could fix problems this deep, and Daniel, almost apologetically, suggested an alternative approach, outlining in simple terms a solution that Eleanor recognized immediately as brilliant, and the group fell silent, some dismissive, some intrigued, and then the groom approached. James Harrington was confident, polished, the kind of man who moved easily in powerful circles, and as he joined the group, his eyes landed on Daniel, and for a split second, something flickered across his face, recognition, respect, something close to relief, and then, in a voice loud enough for those nearby to hear, he said, "Boss, I didn't expect to see you here," and the word hung in the air like a dropped glass, shattering assumptions, and the conversation stopped completely. Eleanor felt time slow, her pulse loud in her ears, and she turned to Daniel, whose expression shifted from surprise to a resigned smile, because this was the moment he had hoped to avoid, and James, oblivious to the shock he'd caused, launched into an explanation, telling anyone who would listen that Daniel was the man who had saved his company, who had stepped in when everything was collapsing, who had restructured operations so effectively that profits had tripled without layoffs, who had taught him what leadership actually meant, and the group stared, recalibrating, embarrassment creeping into their expressions as they realized they had just dismissed the architect of success they admired from afar. Whispers spread quickly, moving through the reception like a current, people glancing at Daniel with new eyes, respect replacing condescension, and Eleanor watched the shift with a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness, because nothing about Daniel had changed, only their perception, and that told her everything she needed to know about the world she came from. Clara found Eleanor soon after, eyes wide, half laughing, half stunned, and whispered that James had mentioned Daniel often, always as the man who taught me everything, and Eleanor laughed softly, because she finally understood why she had felt drawn to him from the beginning. Power recognized power, even when it was quiet. As the evening unfolded, people sought Daniel out, eager to connect, to attach themselves to his insight, but he deflected gracefully, redirecting conversations, introducing others, never leveraging the moment for himself, and Eleanor watched him navigate attention with humility, and she fell a little more in love with him with every refusal to exploit his own worth. When they finally stepped away from the noise, walking along the edge of the estate as the sun dipped toward the horizon, Eleanor asked him why he never told her, and Daniel answered honestly, saying he didn't want their relationship to be influenced by what he could offer professionally, that he had learned the hard way that visibility came with a cost he was unwilling to pay, especially where his son was concerned, and Eleanor understood, more deeply than she expected, because she had paid that cost all her life. But the night wasn't done testing them yet. The final twist came not from revelation, but from choice, because as the wedding weekend drew to a close, Eleanor's parents approached her with an offer disguised as concern, suggesting that Daniel's talents could be properly utilized within the Whitmore Group, a senior role, public recognition, a seat at the table that would make him untouchable, and Eleanor knew exactly what they were really offering: control, integration into their world on their terms, and she felt the familiar pull of legacy, of expectation, of the life she had always lived pressing in on her, and she looked at Daniel, who listened quietly, who did not interrupt, who did not react, and when they turned to him for an answer, he surprised everyone by declining. He thanked them, genuinely, respectfully, and explained that he valued autonomy more than status, impact more than title, and that while he respected their offer, it wasn't the life he wanted for himself or his son. And Eleanor felt a surge of pride so strong it almost brought tears to her eyes, because in that moment, Daniel chose integrity over prestige, and he did it without drama, without apology. Her parents were stunned, unused to refusal, and Eleanor realized then that this man was not just someone she loved, but someone who reminded her who she had been before the world taught her to equate worth with dominance. Later that night, Eleanor made her own choice. She told Daniel she was tired of being the most powerful person in every room and the loneliest one, that she wanted a life built on presence rather than perception, and she asked him, not with a ring or a grand gesture, but with honesty, if he could imagine a future with her that didn't revolve around her empire but around their shared values. Daniel took his time answering, because he respected questions like that, and when he said yes, it was quiet, certain, and real. In the months that followed, Eleanor restructured her own life with the same precision Daniel brought to failing companies, stepping back from roles that drained her, investing in initiatives that aligned with her values, and for the first time, doing so without needing validation. Daniel continued his work on his own terms, expanding selectively, mentoring quietly, and when Noah met Eleanor fully, not as a visitor but as family, the bond formed naturally, without force, because love, like leadership, worked best when it was earned. And the story that began with a billionaire bringing a single dad to her sister's wedding ended not with a revelation of hidden status, but with something far rarer, the recognition that true power is knowing who you are, choosing who you stand beside, and refusing to let the world tell you that worth must be loud to be real. If this story surprised you, moved you, or made you rethink what success really looks like, don't stop here. Subscribe now for more powerful stories where quiet strength wins, love defies expectation, and the final twist always means something.